We live in a twilight world. Today's topic, ventriloquism. We're going to talk about animated puppets, maybe. I don't know, we'll see where this conversation goes. But really in this recording, I want to focus on ventriloquism. So this book here is the book written in Victorian times by Albert Hopkins, called Magic, Stage Illusions and Scientific Diversions. And of course, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the, good old-fashioned Victorian stage magic, and then compare it to what's going on in regards to world stage theatre. Yeah, we're going to draw parallels and make metaphor and allegory, analogies regarding stage magic of then and what's going on right now. Ultimately, we're going to look at illusion warfare, deception, theatricality, smoke and mirrors, dolls, dummies, props, set dressings, light, shadow, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I'm going to read this first paragraph. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's quite boring, and this kind of writing is hard to read. I've made it green, that might help it appear better. So let's start. Ventriloquism may, according to their specialities, be divided into various categories. Some devote their talent to imitation of the cries of animals, the songs of birds, and the noise of tools, etc. Others imitate the sound of musical instruments. Some mock the noise produced by a crowd, a regiment, or a procession, while others again make dolls or dummies speak. Certain ventriloquists imitate the sound of musical instruments, from that of the violin up to that of a brass instrument with the most piercing notes. Others excel in imitating noise of planes, saw, etc. Certain ventriloquists, while hidden by a screen, simply have the faculty of making their audience believe that several persons or even a crowd are in the vicinity. At Egyptian Hall, London, a magician recently made his appearance upon the stage carrying a doll with which he held a somewhat uncouth conversation. The lips of the doll were observed to move, and the illusion was complete, when all at once the doll's head was strangely transformed. The magician had just opened his hand, showing that it was the latter alone that, enclosed in a white glove upon which were a few coloured marks, formed the doll's head. So talking about this picture here, right? The ventriloquist has just pretty much drawn lips and eyes on his hand and then thrown a sheet over, and it looks like he's got a little doll there that's talking. So, what is ventriloquism really? What would be the modern day term? It would be audio deception, yeah? Audio deception. The ventriloquist is speaking, but he's making it look like the puppet is speaking. Yeah, so there's an art to it. You're creating the illusion that something else is speaking. There's an art to it. The ventriloquist is obviously very good at not making his lips move while making it look like someone else's lips are moving, or like the paragraph says here, it's not just about dolls and dummies, it's also imitating sound effects, like crowds and various people, instruments, tools. So we could even, if we move towards modern day, we could apply this to making using sound to make the illusion of explosions, gunfire, helicopter, fighter jets. Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to make this a quick video because I've got things to do tonight. So let's bring up a few examples. So the first obvious example is the good old air raid siren. Yeah, this is just a generic picture I got off the internet. I think this is an old World War II air raid siren in England somewhere. But yeah, man, air raid sirens, yeah? Like I exposed in the Battle of Kiev, all they're doing is blasting air raid sirens over the whole city, but there's no actual missiles or drones or anything actually landing, yeah? That's all happening on TV. Of course, the TV includes the internet as well, yeah? So you Inception warfare, you put the idea of explosions and missiles and that into people's heads. via the Black Mirror, via the internet, via the TV, via the radio, via the newspapers. And then in real life, to make that appear real, you just blare the air raid sirens as if missiles were coming. Unfortunately, most people believe it, and they live action role play what would happen if missiles were coming in. In Ukraine, for example, they all go run into the the metro stations underground, which are being used as air raid shelters. Although, let's be honest, that might have happened in the first year. Most people these days have wised up to it and realised that air raid sirens mean nothing. Yeah. But they won't come out and do what I do and call it out and say this is all part of deception. They have been tricked into believing that the air defense systems have done their job and actually taken out the alleged missiles that were coming their way, when really there was never any missiles. Nothing actually happened. You're just merely playing sound effects over a cityscape. So that's one example. Yeah, ventriloquism or audio deception is air raid sirens. Another one would be what I like to call the masked soldier. Yeah, it's not just the Ukrainians. Yeah, the Russians are also masked. And, whenever they're doing an interview on the news or whatever on the internet, there must be millions upon millions now of interviews that have taken place with Ukrainian soldiers, Russian soldiers, and all of the other in-between soldiers that are supposedly there. They're always wearing a mask. Now, the fact they're wearing a mask and also speaking another language means that the interpreter could easily just overlay any old conversation upon to what he's actually saying. For example, like this image here is from, a Ukrainian soldier that's come to England to do some military training, a commander's course. And they're obviously asking him, like, what do you think of the course and what do you think of the war? Now, for all we know, he could be brutally honest and be like, this is a fucking stupid war that's well over exaggerated on the TV. It's being manipulated by Western powers who are working with Russia. It's a ludicrously stupid war that needs to end immediately. Well, obviously, that's no good for TV. So the interpreter will overlay on top of that something more, suitable for propaganda. Yes, the war is going great. Yes, the British have trained me well. I love my British allies. They are amazing. The British military is amazing. The war in Ukraine is going well. Zelensky is doing well. All this kind of bullshit. You know what I'm saying? How do we know what they're actually saying when they're A, wearing a mask, and B, what they're being said is being translated by an interpreter? So what I believe they're doing is, yes, these Ukrainian soldiers, which in this case we will call the animated puppets, sure, they'll stand in front of the camera, they'll say any old shit, but they will just overlay on top of it the sounds, Ukrainian talk of him saying that, yeah, everything's great, everything's wonderful, the war is going well, we're winning, and then, of course, just put the English version on top of that. So this, in my opinion, would be another example of ventriloquism and audio deception. What they're really saying under that mask is not what is being presented to us on the TV, if you get what I'm saying. So a third example would be these videos that flood the internet whenever there's a war. And they're the videos where it's supposedly someone in their hotel or their home filming out of their window, and they just so happen to be filming exactly where a missile is supposedly landing, which is, near impossible when you consider like the slowest missile is about 500 miles an hour, where the more modern ones, like the Mach 10 hypersonic missiles, are almost 7,000 miles per hour. Yeah? Yet somehow these folks can, you know, these supposedly regular everyday people know where it's going to hit and can whip their camera out in time to film the explosion. Yeah, obviously, I've spoken about this before. They're not actually real people. They are agents put in place to be in the right place at the right time. And I would say most of them are men, yeah? So MI6 agents, CIA agents, Mossad agents, or, you know, the ones that directly work for the Hidden Hand, the Department of Dirty Tricks, the Ghost Legion, whatever. But what they do with these clips, yeah, is they always overlay the audio sounds of a female voice screaming. Yeah. Next time you see the old shaky video from a hotel room filming a missile explosion, I guarantee you there will be a woman's voice screaming. This has been overlaid on top of it. Yeah. Now, as someone that has like zero, you know, you got to remember, I'm a caveman. Yeah. I like going to the gym and being outdoors and all this kind of shit. I've only been fucking around with the internet and iPads and that for about 4 years. I managed to work out within my first year how to add audio to videos. Yeah. So if a caveman like me can add audio on top of my videos, it's not hard for people like the 77th Brigade, yeah, MI6 to basically get the original raw footage and then just overlay very loud explosions and a screaming woman's voice. I'll try and find an example. Let's have a look right now. Funnily enough, while I was just, you know, looking for videos, I thought I'd go for Venezuela because that's the most recent. I mean, the worst for it was actually the, you know, Israel after the 7th of October attacks, right? When supposedly Hamas were attacking inside Israel, right? And the amount of footage of being filmed out of windows and then screaming and then shaky footage, more screaming, and then the sound of an explosion without actually any visual example of explosion was just crazy. But weirdly enough, it appears that lots more new footage has now emerged with Venezuela, which wasn't floating around at the time, which is quite interesting. I've only just discovered that when looking for a video. But I took a screenshot here, yeah, of when you're doing like a recording. All you simply got to do is press that microphone button, yeah, and then you could just overlay on top of your already audio whatever you want. Bangs, whistles, air raid sirens, screaming children, screaming women. I noticed in these new videos that have emerged from Venezuela, there's a lot of American voices doing the commentary. Yeah. Which is quite interesting. There's people in English there to speak about, you know, give us a a description of what they're seeing at the same time. But anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked. You know, I'm going to talk more about that at a later date, about how they do that. But anyway, the main point is audio deception. You can overlay sounds on top of videos, and it's very easy, and they do that a lot. Yeah. You got to remember, you know, the physical senses are seeing, smelling, tasting, and then hearing. You know, if you want something to appear real, to match up with the stuff you're presenting on the Black Mirror and in the newspapers and on the radio, yeah, it's good to hit the physical senses, and then, you know, it's more believable. I mean, there's a, you know, regarding the latest stuff that's happened in the Middle East, when they were interviewing people that got back to the UK from Dubai, every one of them said the same thing. I could hear explosions. Yeah? Just because you heard an explosion, that doesn't mean it was an actual explosion, if you know what I mean. Did you see it with your own eyes? Did you experience it? Did you fully see a missile hit the ground, or did you just hear an explosion in the distance? But anyway, that brings me on to my next example, or way in which they would do that, and it would be one of these things here. The LRAD, the Long Range Acoustic Device, also known as a sound cannon. So this example here, this picture I've got, this is obviously a maritime version, yeah? You put on naval ships to communicate with other naval ships. You can, of course, get a land version, yeah? They come in all shapes and sizes. You get little ones, big ones. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people call them a sound weapon because I'm sure you've heard, you know, about the long-range acoustic device. It can be used or turned up, turned down to a certain frequency that disperses crowds. Yeah, people call it like a non-lethal weapon. So when it's projected at crowds, it can make them feel like their skin is burning, and it just makes them want to run away, right? Also, you know, just like in this picture here, you can communicate in like a... It basically makes the sound into like a beam, and it could beam to over here and not get spread. But anyway, the point is, all you would have to do, yeah, is put one of these somewhere in a city, whatever city is designated to have the illusion of war placed upon it. You put one of these on top of a skyscraper or hidden inside of a van or a lorry parked down a back street, and it would work ideal in a built-up area with skyscrapers and buildings and alleyways, because the noise will just echo and bounce off all the buildings. But you could just play the sound effects of a war. The rat-a-tat-tat of distant gunfire, artillery rounds going off, being both fired and landing, helicopters in the distance, fighter jets going overhead. Yeah? You could actually do air raid sirens from this, you know? It's not hard, is it? I'm pretty sure, I can't prove it, but that's what they did in Kiev. Probably before I got there, the couple of days before I got there, but they must have done something on some level to convince the people of Kiev that there's an actual war going on. Yeah, we know there was no soldiers, we know there was no helicopters, we know there was no explosions and fighter jets, but there probably was the distant sound of artillery guns, which I believe was placed by these, especially next to the train station when people were leaving. Because the only time I heard, when I was in Ukraine, heard anything that could slightly resemble distant artillery fire was when I was on the train leaving. So I suspect somewhere around the main train station they've got one of these inside of a van, and it's just playing the sort of distant noise, the distant thunder of artillery rounds. So yeah, and you know, this is not new. Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. They did this in World War II. They had armored vehicles with speakers on the top of them, and basically they'd get them to drive into an empty field, and they would be blasting out the cleverly made audio sounds that mimicked a whole armored division arriving. Background chatter of soldiers and radios, but you know, the clanking, the sounds of the treads of tanks rolling in. Yeah, and of course the little patches of German soldiers that were still around in northern France, they would supposedly hear this and believe it. They believed they could hear the sounds of an entire armoured division arriving in a field, one field away. But it wasn't, it was just one tank with a speaker. So once again, you know, sonic deception, audio deception, it works. And it's not new, and it's been used for a long, long time. So yeah, man, I'd put this under the umbrella of ventriloquism, in that one tank is blasting out on its speaker the sounds of many tanks arriving. Yeah, and unless you are brave enough to go into that field and go see for yourself, you're going to, for the rest of your life, think that the noises you heard were really a division arriving, you know? And by the way, this picture, it's just a generic picture I got off the internet. I have actually seen better pictures where there's a whole, like, big square speaker system on top of a Sherman tank. But anyway, you get the idea, right? Yeah, a speaker mimicking the sound and creating the illusion of a whole armored division arriving. Pretty clever stuff, yeah? Then again, yeah, even better, you could just get a small unit of artillerymen to place them outside of a city, the city in question, where the illusions of war are being created, and just get them to fire endlessly into an empty field. Now, whether or not you tell the artillerymen in question that it's part of a deception campaign or not, well, I don't know, that's a different story. But you could just say to them, look, gunners, there's potential enemy coming over that direction there, in that field. We don't have the manpower at this moment of chaos to take them on directly. So we're going to do what they call in the military a show of force. So we're just going to keep blasting our artillery to make it sound like there's a lot more artillery available than actually is available. So think about it. When you're doing this, firstly, you're giving these gunners, these artillerymen, a real lived experience that they're going to talk about for the rest of their lives. You've merely just told them that the enemy is in this direction and that they have a job to do, and that's blast the artillery guns as much as they can to make it seem like there's lots of artillery guns. But also the civilians, who are a couple of kilometers to the east, west, whatever, they're going to hear this in the distance, and they're going to assume that it's actual artillery firing upon enemy, when actually there is no enemy there. You get what I'm saying? Once again, whether or not I'm doing a good job of explaining this, probably not. But in my head, it's just so simple. To me, I don't know why, but it's just so, to create the illusion of war is just so ridiculously easy. It is so easy, it's unbelievable. Like, it can't be that easy, but it is that easy. People in the military, soldiers, artillerymen, gunners, they just follow orders. Yeah? If you place a gun battery out here and give them an order, we need you to fire in that direction as a show of force because the enemy is potentially over there, they're going to do it. So I would personally, I don't think you would tell them that they're part of a grand deception to fool their country and the people in the city that there's an actual war going on, so they can be a part of a whole manipulation process that messes up the whole world and creates World War 33. Of course not. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these deception campaigns, the thing is, most soldiers are very rarely told that they were part of a deception campaign. And if they are told, it's later on, yeah? After whatever has needed to be done has been done. So you might tell a load of soldiers or a whole brigade that they're getting ready for an operation, I don't know, down in the south of a country, and they're going to do this, and there's plans, and everyone gets ready, and then right at the last minute it gets called off because something else has, taken its place, or a better option has been available. But really the whole time is that they were being used as part of a deception campaign to make it look like a major offensive was about to occur in that part of the country. And I think only very rarely do they actually get told as like someone a higher up, a general, a brigadier, a field marshal might come in and say, sorry guys, but you were part of a deception campaign and we couldn't tell you for operational security purposes, you know, loose lips sink ships. So we couldn't tell you. We had to make you think it was all real. And then they'll say, just to let you know, your actions, although they were part of a deception, worked really well. And the real major offensive up in the north, it was a success due to the fact that the enemy was diverted by us getting ready. Blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that would be another way to create audio deception, is just genuinely get artillery guns to fire off artillery rounds into an empty field, and then the people close to it will hear it. Even at night time, they will see the distant flashes, which will be like fireworks, and to them it's real. Like, why they're not going to automatically assume that this is part of a deception, are they? Especially when the news is hammering them. Every bit of media is telling them that there is a war taking place in their country, in their city. And that's it, really. I'm going to wrap this video up. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Another example would be when a news presenter is doing a live interview, and you'll hear the sound of an explosion, and he'll sort of turn around and look and say, yeah, that's right, Bob, I can hear explosions in the distance. And then, you know, they'll cut the feed. Another one would be this one here. This is my actual own footage from when I was in Ukraine, where, you know, your phone will start bleeping and you'll get a government warning about potential air raid happening. Take shelter immediately, blah, blah, blah. What was interesting is when I was in a hostel, you know, and there's like 20 people sleeping in the same room, all of the people from Ukraine had a more modern phone. Their phones actually blasted out the air raid noise via their phone. And it was crazy because it all happened at once. So we're all in this hostel, you know, the bunk beds and that. And there's about 12 Ukrainians in there. And all of their phones at the same time started blasting out an air raid siren where they were getting this notification. Didn't happen on my phone, I think, because I had a very old phone. I had a Motorola or whatever, but the people had a newer iPhone, and that was, to me, that was crazy. Yeah, they've got your own phone blasting out air raid sirens and telling you, giving you prompts and instructions. But yeah, that's it for this video. Getting sick of the sound of my own voice. We live in a twilight world. There are no friends at dusk.